Welcome, everyone. Today, we are doing podcast number 3. And we are doing this series of 5 podcasts with Professor Shane from Biola University. Today, we're going to talk about credit. And specifically, we're actually going to talk about that scary moment when credit is trashed or stolen. So what to do in those cases. Shane, it's great having you in this podcast and in this series. Welcome again.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, we're going to talk today about credit, right? So let's start a little bit about credit, because credit is a really interesting construct. So can you talk a little bit about credit? What matters with credit? And then we're going to start talking a little bit more about what happens when bad things happen with credit.
Yeah. So credit comes from this idea of credit and debit. Debit it's an accounting term where you have in the 1600s, a Dutchman in trade discovered a booking system where he realized that every trade there was two things that happened. So if you sold water to someone, then there's the debit of the water and there's the credit of the cash. And then, so they created this kind of like double entry journal accounting where it's a T account and on the left is the debit and on the right is the credit. I think it's how that works. But so when you hear that word credit, it means you're being credited something. And so credit means typically that you're getting something, and in kind of the traditional modern view, it's you're getting something now, and then you have to debit it back. You have to give and pay it back later. A big misconception about credit is that it doesn't matter if you don't borrow. And so some people will say, well, credit's like, that's for all those people who don't know what to do with money and they just borrow. And so I don't really have to worry about it. But credit is really something that affects just about every part of someone's life. And even if you do everything right, someone may steal your credit and then trash it. And so today we really want to focus on kind of why credit's important and why even if you don't use credit, it's still something you need to pay attention to because others can steal it. But and
it's one of the interesting things about credit. And as you know, I'm an immigrant, right? So I grew up in Honduras and moved over 6 years ago here. And one of the first misconception that I had was, well, I actually have some savings and everything. I didn't have much. I guess I should have a good credit, and I didn't, right? So it's really interesting, the fact that you need credit to access some things like buying a car, buying a house. It's sometimes even like getting a job. The role of credit here is super important, right?
Yeah, it's how credit is in our culture is it's a sign of your character. And so basically, if you have good credit, then people trust you more. If you have bad credit, then you're less trustworthy. And so a credit report is something that most people have, unless they're what's called credit invisible. But if you are credit visible, you have a credit report. And it's a testimony of who you are to the world and how you manage the world's resources. And so you want it to be excellent. You always want to have a reputation that's excellent, that'll open up doors. And if you have a trashy credit, as we'll say, a bad report, then your housing opportunities. So it's not just about buying a home, it's also about renting a home, because landlords will always run your credit every time. And there's always a queue. In today's world, there's not enough housing. And so there's a long queue of people waiting. The landlord's going to run credit on everyone, and whoever has excellent credit gets put to the front. And my wife and I, when we were renting, saw this over and over again. I saw it as a single person. The moment the landlord, I was always waiting, like, please run my credit. And then, and they would always have a huge relief, or they would just get excited. They'd put me right up to the front. And so it affects that. It affects, your utility, even when you rent, or if you bought, when you call up the utility company to start your water and power, they're going to run your credit. And if they're not going to start power and water if you have bad credit, and what they're going to ask you to do is have someone co-sign or to have you, give them a cash deposit.
Yeah.
Insurance can go up, not quite in California, but in many other states.
Yeah.
Car insurance and other insurance premiums will be higher. Mortgages can be hundreds of thousands of dollars more expensive with bad credit. And job prospects, as you mentioned, employers do run credit. And if it's a competitive job and you're basically the same as another person and you have bad credit and the other person has good credit, then there goes your job, and they're not supposed to, by law, have the credit be the main determining factor, but they, if there's lots of applicants, you're just not going to rise to the top. So credit's important. Yeah.
And this is really interesting because I know for a fact Latinos culturally, for example, having a debt is a bad thing, like culturally. So there is a lot about, don't get into debt. I mean, maybe a house, that's probably one of the areas, but everything else is kind of like culturally, historically, Latinos, we try to be kind of like, let's not get into debt, but then that actually influences credit score, for example. So I'm wondering how many trouble some communities like Latino that don't have that credit kind of like tradition, right, or culture. Talking about credit score, don't think of how that can affect other areas of life, like jobs, for example, getting access to good rent and all that. So interesting.
Yeah. And so, how people generate a credit report, the most common way that someone becomes credit visible is that they open up a credit card. And the second most common way that someone becomes credit visible is that they become an authorized participant of a credit card, like a co-signee. And so a really nice way, if you are credit invisible, is to just find a parent, a sibling, someone you trust and they trust you, and just get on their credit card. And then you will instantly become credit visible. And so once you become credit visible, you want to really protect your credit for the reasons we mentioned. And there's a defensive and an offensive way of protecting credit. And so defensively, the number one way you'll have good credit is you just pay all your bills. That is the single most important thing of everything I say in this podcast, is that you just gotta, and it's everything. So dental. So if you go to the dentist or if you go to the doctor and you don't pay a bill, they'll put you in collections. And the moment you get into collections, all of that data goes to what are called the credit bureaus. And there's 3 of them in the US. And most of the time they have all the same information. And the moment that a dentist or a doctor or Best Buy or whatever it is, a electronic company, Apple, you don't pay a bill, then you now have a mispayment in your credit report. And that is like, it's like, you just got a millstone tied to your neck and thrown in the sea. It'll be all red, all bad. So the top credit score is mid to upper 800s, or basically mid 800s. And then a really bad credit score is in the 500s. And if you are credit invisible, or if you're just credit visible and you don't have any debt or anything, you'll probably be kind of mid to upper 600s, low 700s. That's the most you'll ever be able to get if you're just purely defensive.
How are you offensive then?
So defensively, just pay all your bills. Also monitor, because the way you monitor is you go to annualcreditreport.com. They'll let you, right now they let you pull your credit report from the 3 different bureaus as much as you want, but that's because of COVID. Normally you're limited to a couple per year. And so if you're just monitoring your credit report, you'll see whether there's any addresses that you don't recognize, whether anyone's opened up any credit in your name. Because what you don't want is for someone else to open up credit and then not pay their bills in your name. And that'll also trash your credit, obviously. And so that's another defensive. You're just watching your credit. And I don't check my credit report at all, because I pay what's called identity theft insurance.
Yeah.
and it's through my employer. You can get it, anytime, but I pay $7 a month, and they are checking it every second.
Yeah.
And I'm just opened up a credit card to get free miles to go to Hawaii for our 10-year anniversary. And the moment I put in my application, within minutes, I got an email from my identity theft insurance group saying, "Hey, someone's trying to open up, like they're inquiring about your credit. They're pulling your credit report.
Yeah.
Do you recognize this person?"
Yeah.
And so that's great. I love that there's a watchdog looking at my credit. And so that's pure defense right there.
Yeah.
Offense, this is key. So if you want to move from kind of the 600s, low 700s to the 800s, the moment you're in the 800s, then you kind of have this little shine on you, and people like it, and so landlords like it, mortgage lenders like it, and banks love it. It's called the 800 Club, and they actually have like people who get together who feel proud about being in the 800s. And so the number one way to get into the 800 Club is what's called your credit utilization, or how much credit you use. So the ultimate goal is to have lots and lots and lots of available credit, and to not use any of it.
Okay. It's just, I have it for fun, and because it's kind of, yeah.
So a credit card, when you open it, will give you a line of credit. So it's usually like $2,000, $5,000. And then every year that you're with that credit card company, they'll naturally increase your credit line. And what people don't know is you can actually call them up. And I recommend maybe once or twice a year, just calling them up or going online and increasing your credit. And you just, the more available credit you have, the better. That's the denominator of credit utilization. And so that'll naturally lower your utilization of credit.
Yeah.
And if you want to be in the 700s, you got to stick to 30%. You got to only use 30% of your available credit.
Yeah.
But if you want to be in the 800 Club, you have to be less than 8%. So what you don't ever want to do is use all of your credit, be at 100%. And then you're guaranteed to stay kind of in that 600 range. And even if you're paying your bill every month, if you're utilizing 100% of your credit, you're not going to have a great credit score. And so what's so great is to get a credit card as early as you can, and just keep pushing them to increase your credit, and don't use it very much. And use it as little as possible, and let them kind of increase your credit. And so value that above the points and the cash, because if you can get your credit score up to 800, I think that's worth more than some cash back, or and it's just kind of, you're building something.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And some banks now give you every month a credit score, and that's pretty useful. That's something that I use. I also have that identity theft. And actually, I want to touch this subject because you got your identity stolen, right?
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that experience, and how do we, like, first I want to learn about how it happened, and like a little bit more, and then also how to protect it, right?
So identity theft is the fastest growing crime in the US. It's a third of all Americans have experienced it, so I'm not alone. But my first time was in college. I had opened up a bank account. They gave me a few starter checks. I waited to get my real checks, and then I very unwisely or foolishly just threw away the starter checks, and someone got in the dumpster and found them. And then so identity theft just means someone's posing as you, trying to access your good name, your financial capacity. And so this person had these checks, and then they even wrote what they were buying in the memo, which was hilarious to me. And so they tried at first to buy a computer, but they picked the wrong guy. I didn't have a lot of money in my account. And so bounced. A bounce check means someone tries to cash more than what's in the account. And then they tried, I think the next thing was like some sort of headphones, and then that bounced. And then they tried one other thing, so they had 3 straight bounce checks. And every time a check bounces, it's a huge fee, $40, $50 fee that's charged to my account. And then there was two separate fees that were happening. So I woke up one morning, checked my account. It was like hundreds of dollars of fees. And thankfully, this person actually was never able to cash anything because he just, the fees drew down the balance. And by the time, So anyway, but it took months to get the money back and to have them clear it. And that's the biggest problem with identity theft is, often you'll get your money back, but it's months of your life that are spent trying to clear your name and get the money back. And the second time was during COVID. My employer called me and said, why are you applying for unemployment insurance? And I was like, no, I'm employed. And so multiple people tried to apply for unemployment insurance in my name because it was such a good level, at that time. And so I had to try and clear that. And I had to go and call all sorts of departments saying, hey, don't give this person any money because it's not me. And if they do give them money, it's reportable income and I'd have to pay taxes on that,
And do they need your social security for doing that, or is it possible? Like I'm amazed.
I know, right? They must have gotten all that information somehow. And here's another thing that's interesting. People assume, there's the baby boomer and the greatest generation. Their philosophy is, if they're really careful, they'll say, I won't ever give my social security to anyone. Never. And especially not online, because if you pull your credit report, you have to give your social security. And so I'll even have some students that'll say, no way, we don't do that. But the credit bureaus themselves are being hacked. And the DMV is being hacked, and the US government's being hacked. And so our social is just out there. It's out there, there's no way of stopping. And so what ends up happening is if you don't pull your credit because you're scared of giving your social security number, then you're playing into their hands, because the greatest weapon you have is to look to see whether it's been stolen, and then preventatively, if something happens, you get to stop it. But if you're just not wanting to look because you don't want to give out your social security, well, kind of that ship has sailed, and your credit, all your information is just kind of out there. I just got a letter yesterday that all of my information had been compromised. Because every time there's a data breach, companies will have to email you or send you letters, and that just happens. So I got it stolen 2 times. And some people assume if they're credit invisible, they don't have to worry about it. But there's a story of a student who, heard about the credit report, decided to look. She'd never opened up any credit. She thought she was credit invisible, and then she downloaded to look up her report, and it was a big file. And she's like, "Oh, I actually have a credit report." And then she printed it out, and it was 15, 16 pages. And someone had been using her social security and her credit for about, a decade. And it literally took her about 13 years to clear her credit because it had been so long of someone using the credit. And there's 1 million child identity theft incidences in just 2020. And 50% of those million cases were people under the age of 6. And so it's kind of like, this is something that's just in the water, and you have to be careful about it. And social media is a huge area where people get their identity stolen. And it's not just you have an annoying person who's doing the deep fake on you. It's like people lose money. In 2021, they counted that fraud victims over social media lost $800 million just from people using information from social media. And cybercrime complaints have gone up 180%, and so losses from those complaints have rocketed 400%, from $1 billion to $7 billion in just 4 years. And so there's quite a bit of problem with this identity theft. And the greatest possible way to avoid it is to be seeing, getting that notification when anything's happening. So you can kind of ward it off when it, and that's kind of defensive, but you can actually help stop it from happening in the first place by doing what's called a fraud alert. And it's free. You just do it once a year. You call one of the bureaus, and they will just make sure and not extend credit out until they call you and confirm. That's another good way.
No, that's And I remember you mentioned a little bit that the information is there, like the Equifax hack that they stole 200 and I don't know 250 million social securities. And when I saw the number, I was like, well, the population of the US, like basically they stole all the,
Yeah.
not all, but pretty close.
Yeah. All the credit visible people, which
Yeah.
is the majority. Yeah. So
Exactly. Yeah, that was crazy. I was like kind of like, okay. And I didn't want to give my social to, I don't know, when I was buying a car or everything. It's like, why are you asking for it? And then it's like, okay, Equifax was hacked. So I guess there goes.
I know.
There we go. Yeah.
So there, one of the identity theft people, he was so confident at this process where you just kind of like watch that he had his social security number painted on the side of his car. And he's like, go ahead, try, basically, and so nowadays your social security is just out there, and there's not really most services we need. We just have to give personal information. So I like the monitoring, and then I like being careful and having fraud alerts. And if anything gets out of control, that's when you freeze it and you don't allow anyone to do anything with your information.
Yeah.
But a freeze is only the last resort, because a freeze can be a really big problem. If you do ever if someone's running your credit and they can't do it.
Yeah, and coming from a technical world, I always think that one of the bad things of how social securities are structured is that it's just a number, and basically anybody that gets access to it, they can use it, and then even for validation, sometimes it's obvious questions, whereas I mean there are mathematical ways of how crypto really works. In that digital signatures is that you have a secret component that every time you want to authorize something, you digitally sign with that private key, and then you can do unique signatures. So basically, nobody could use again authorize something again. Well, actually, somebody, unless they have that key, would be able to actually fake that authorization. So I always think like we need to move to something like that. And I know other countries, Estonia was doing something like that with their ID. I think at some point we need to move. It's a little bit more complex, so not everybody can fully understand it. But at the same time, that's probably the only way that we can stop some of that, because
blockchain is going to fix this. So I think this is the last gasp of these criminals, and blockchain really is just going to create a much better environment where people can transact in a much safer. And there's so much validation of a transaction, and it's authentic, it's clear, it's legitimate. So the only trick will be if there are kind of that double key system, the storing of that private key. If someone, all those examples of people with all their money, cryptocurrency, and it's like they're a billionaire, but they can't remember their password, and
you ended up kind of like. I mean that's crazy. Like and you can see the money. Like for example, if you lose your, if you know the address where it is, you can actually see the money.
It's right there.
It's right there. You cannot touch it.
Yeah. So there's not foolproof, but it'll be a huge improvement when you have blockchain moderating kind of credit pulling and credit reports and credit access, and banks using blockchain. All of that's going to be so good for everyone. And so I'm excited. That's going to, in the same way that internet helped innovate, online markets. So like Amazon and eBay really created a good thing. A good and bad, but mostly good. And I think COVID created this amazing app-based way you can sit in a parking lot at Target and have them just drop off things in your car. That's awesome. I think blockchain is the next thing that's going to create kind of like such a neat environment for how people can transact online in a secure way. So
totally. Yeah, I'm a big believer of the technology, and then many of those use cases. Shane, we are on time, but I mean, any final thoughts about credit and also identity? Would love some final thoughts about this.
Yeah, I'd say this is something that requires vigilance. If credit is one of your most precious assets, and people don't quite realize, they think a house is an asset or a bank account, but your credit is an asset that'll open up doors in the same way that those things open up doors. And so we should be vigilant in the same way we protect our health and our good name. We should protect our credit and have as much credit available and use it as little as possible is the mantra for credit and monitor it all the time. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Let's stay with that actually. So as much credit as possible and use it as little as possible.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Shane. This has been a great podcast. We have 2 more. They're going to be super, super interesting. But yeah, thank you for the session and thank you, everyone.
Yeah, my pleasure.